And welcome to episode 60 of Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. Sorry for the delay, all sorts of last minute trip ups as per usual. I've just noticed a bunch of people commenting in the wrong place as well, wondering where I've got to. So hopefully they're managing to find their way over to where the video is in fact started. Right, okay, yes, that's thrown me into total and utter confusion. Here we are. Welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. On tonight's show, yes, that's probably a good place to go. Sorry, totally utterly thrown here. So, no, not that. Okay, yeah, so on tonight's show, what I'm going to be talking about is dandelions, the humble dandelion, a very, very common spring flower across the northern hemisphere in the more temperate climates. Apologies to you in the southern hemisphere or the equatorial regions. Perhaps I don't know whether you get dandelions there. Anyway, I'm sure a lot of what I talk about tonight will cross-reference to other flowers. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about playing around with a macro lens, or if you don't have a macro lens, how you can actually do something similar with a magnifying glass. Then what else? After that, we're going to be on to the critique section. And in critique tonight, also showing up with dandelions, Becca has been taking photos of her daughter blowing the dandelion clock. Cliff has been playing around with panoramics at an aviation museum and is looking for a bit of feedback on this and another image. Hege from Norway is also been playing with dandelions, wants to know how she can kind of create a bit more impact with this image. Nuria saw this snail in her backyard, took a photo, and again is wanting to know what she can do to perhaps improve the image. Stacey took this photo of this building and then noticed that there was all this it was fine until she sort of put it through a filter of hers and then noticed that it sort of had this sort of fluffy halo effect around the building and the trees, and she's wondering where that's come from and whether there's anything you can do about it. So we're going to chat a little bit about that. And finally, Vandana has been playing around with some spices, balancing them up, wondering, well, what she's after is whether this picture has a sense of balance or not. Oh, and VG. VG's been playing around with a mirror, black backcloth and some shells, and she's looking to see how she might sort of improve what she's doing there. So that's what we're talking about tonight. So here we are, live on Facebook, finally. I don't know if any of you read my blog last week, but my blog last week was actually written precisely about the fact that it doesn't seem to matter how much time I leave, how much preparation I do. The fact that I've done 60 of these, always something seems to trip me up right in the very last minute. Anyway, we now have comments coming in. So yeah, if you're watching this on the live version on Facebook, leave a comment. Let me know you're here. Show me a bit of support. Let me know that I'm not entirely alone. And if this is your first time here as well, let me know where in the world you're from, because we've got people dotted all over the place, from Texas to India. So it's always good to know where people are tuning in from. So let's see what comments we've got. Well, my wife said, hello everyone. Now, I've just got, was that another comment over in the wrong place? I just need to quickly double check that. No, I'm hoping that they've managed to find their way over here. Okay, so let's flick back. Sorry. Comments, right. Ben says good evening from Edinburgh. Jim is saying hi from Dumfries. Nuria's here saying hello everyone. Robert's howdy from Texas. Inga's here from Norway. Brian from Dumfries as well says good evening to all who are watching. Jackie's made it in from South Africa. Stacey's here from Pennsylvania, where it's been pretty hot for the past week apparently, but it's cooled to a pleasant 70 degrees. Not 90 as it was at the weekend, and that's Fahrenheit for all of you who are worrying about Celsius type temperatures. John from, Ohio says hello Kim and viewers from a very warm day in Ohio. And Russ says evening all. That's great. Oh, well, that's good. That means Russ made it across. VG is here from India. Sandra's here from Birmingham. Pat's made it across. Good, yes, because it was comments on the other bit were both from Pat and Russ wondering where I'd got to. So I had to put a link to come back here. So glad you made it. Becca's here saying evening everyone, and what's the Pat saying the white fluff may be from the dandelion. I might have missed a bit here. Oh, and Heger's made it with an emoji of a hand and a flower. So glad you could make it. Cool. Right. Okay. So if you find me freaking out and being completely utterly unprepared entertaining, amusing, educational, or the podcasts themselves fit into any of these categories, and you would like to support these podcasts, then please visit buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres. That's the best place to help support these podcasts. Another way you can support them as well is invite your friends. If you happen to know other photographers who you think might be interested in these podcasts, then do invite them along. We've got a fantastic, really friendly, helpful, interactive community here. Let's grow it. Let's get more people from the world in where we can share our knowledge, experience and interest in photography. So yeah, invite your friends. Okay, right. So what are we going to do? Let's start off. Let's go to the Dandelions and the macro lens. I got myself a macro lens just before Christmas, and I've sort of been playing around with it. Now, it's quite fun. It's actually taken a little bit of getting used to. But part of me has been waiting for dandelion season as such, because the great thing about dandelions is you've essentially got kind of three aspects of dandelions you can go for. There's the flower, the bright yellow flower, and then you've got, when the flower sort of finishes its cycle, that part of the yellow cycle, then you have the seeds. You have the dandelion clock, these wonderful sort of ball of seeds, which as every child then loves grabbing these and blowing them, and all the seeds fly off, a bit like you saw in Becca's picture just now. And then there's the notion of the individual seed heads themselves, which normally you can't get too close to with your camera. But if you've got a macro lens or you've got a magnifying glass, you can. Now, the great thing about the macro lens is, as well as being able to get in quite close, because it's a bit of a zoom lens, you quite often have quite a narrow depth of field. And what this allows for is quite nice bokeh, which is the quality of the blur in the background. And you can kind of play that to your advantage. So what I thought I would do is talk a little bit. I've just been playing around, and I thought this is the kind of thing that pretty much all of us can do. And it can be quite fun. You can get some really interesting results out of something as simple as a dandelion, which, like I said, very basic, a very common flower, although an awful lot of people also see it as a weed. My mother always said a weed is just a flower in the wrong place. I think other people have other definitions. They do tend to kind of take over and strangle everything else if you're not too careful. But they're great flowers also for the pollinating insects as well. So at the moment there is, in Britain, there's what's known as no mow May, which is the recommendation you don't mow your lawn, or you leave a chunk of your lawn unmowed, for those of you who have gardens, to allow these spring flowers like dandelions and daisies and other things for the pollinating insects. So what I was doing then, I started playing around, and I'll show you then, where are we? So yeah, let's just briefly, I'll show you this photo here, which is essentially the combination of a seed head, a bottle of water spray, and a bottle of water with a spray head on it, and it's dandelions in the background and the macro lens. But what I want to do sort of to move into that, to sort of show you the difference. First of all, let's just, these are all unedited. I'm just wanting to kind of get there into the story. These aren't award-winning photos particularly, but for anybody who's not sure, anybody who doesn't live in the kind of northern hemisphere temperate climates, this is what a dandelion is. And it's a beautiful bright yellow, and that yellow against that green of the grass is a common colour combination known to gardeners certainly everywhere in Britain. Now the interesting thing is you can look down and you can take a single photo, but if you sort of move down towards sort of get down a bit lower, then what you can do is, what's always a fun trick is the notion of echoes. And with this case, so you have your dandelion, and then you see these blurred ones out of focus in the distance, where what they're doing is they're echoing that splash of yellow. And like I say, this is completely unedited, but just quite simply cropping in something like that immediately it makes it a little bit more interesting than just the dandelion on its own. You get that sense of more going on and these little splashes of colour. And then depending on what else might be behind, whether there's a brick wall in the distance or just more extended lawn or greenery, you can get different, will depend on the kind of other colours that might come into the picture. But once the dandelion's like this for a few days, and then essentially the petals disappear and the seed head comes in. So again, unedited, this is just to sort of show you. Now, what I wanted to show you here, what becomes really interesting with the camera is where you decide to focus the camera, because this is taken whereby it's focused right on the front. Now, because we were talking about a narrow depth of field, now, like I say, with most macro lenses, you automatically get a fairly narrow depth of field. You can obviously change your aperture. But even if you're using just an ordinary lens, if you go for the widest aperture you can, then what happens is the depth of field that you've got isn't as big as the width of the dandelion. So you'll get some of it in focus and some of it out of focus. Now, this is what it's like if it's focused on the front. So what you can see here is this seed head at the front here is nice and sharp. And then as the ball starts to curve round, it gets more and more out of focus and disappears. And the centre is quite out of focus. However, if you then adjust your focus into the middle of it, what you see now is where all these seeds attach into the head is now in focus. And you're kind of partially seeing through the dandelion that what seemed like a wall of seed heads at the beginning have now kind of just gone into a blur. They've blurred through, and you can still kind of see through it. And I love that fact that you can go from something that seems quite solid almost on the outside to becoming almost transparent, depending.
Lost you, Kim. Just come on.
Oh no. Okay, look, I think I am back again. So right, apologies for that. Maggie just came through to tell me that I'd sort of disappeared off the screen. So anyway, looks like I am back again. A couple of quick questions here. Comments. Stacey says, I'd rather not want them on my lawn everywhere in the spring. Becca says that you're back, but you only froze for about 2 seconds. Vici says I'm good. Okay, that's good. Brian wants to know what lens I was using for these shots. And basically what it is, it's I'm using a Canon 100mm macro lens. So it's a fixed prime lens, and yeah, it's that standard macro lens that you can get from Canon if you're using a Canon. Okay, Jackie says good here too. Okay, that's a relief. Right. Okay, let's flip back then. So what I was saying is, what I love about the idea then that you just by changing the focus from the front to the center, you can go come back to that. You can have what seems like an almost impenetrable wall of seed heads, and you just focus past it, and those front parts become out of focus, and now you can see into the center. And if I focus a bit further again, I can actually focus just about on the ones that are behind. So you can now see the seeds that are the other side of it are now in focus. Although we've now got so many layers of out of focus, it's really quite blurred. But it's just to show you that you don't necessarily, with these things, have to focus on the front. You can focus on the back or the center or the front. And that gives you different patterns and different starting points to play with. Now, the next bit of fun you can do with this is, one of the things I often talk about is the notion of backlight or whatever. So what happens if you hold this up to bright light, or in this case, just if you get down low, get underneath the dandelion, or you pick one, place it on a slightly higher surface and sort of shoot up to the light, have the sky behind you. And here again, using the macro lens has allowed me to get in very close, and we're now getting some really beautiful textures and patterns. And here again, what I've got is it's focused right on the closest part. So you can see this bit's in sharp focus, the center is out of focus, and as it curves round, it gets more and more out of focus. And that's really quite beautiful. But again, with this, what you can do is you can focus on the middle part. And if I do this, suddenly you see the front becomes, you know, just a slight sort of softening blur. But now you get nice sharpness into the seed heads where they're sort of, you know, where they're attaching, but also out on the edges. So the outside edge so it now doesn't feel like a complete ball. It almost feels like a cross section that you're seeing with sharpness on the edges there, which is really nice. And then you can play around with whatever backgrounds you want, zoom in a bit, get nice. And something like this, I think, where there were clouds, there was a bright patch of sky, darker patch of cloud, probably trees down in the bottom right corner. And I think something like this is really quite hauntingly beautiful. And this is completely unedited. This is just straight out the camera. I could then go in and put it into Photoshop and enhance certain bits and play down other bits. But the thing is it's back to this thing of part of what we love about photography, I think, is that it allows us to see the world in ways that we don't normally see it. Sometimes it's just capturing a moment, but very often the exploration of photography, whether you're capturing movement or you're like when you capture water, whether you're freezing water droplets in midair or whether you're smoothing it out over a long exposure, or the notion of the macro where you can zoom into places. And so you would never see this like that. We know it's a dandelion. We know it's a dandelion clock. We know, because we've just been talking about the way it's focused, how you can create this effect, and yet it's something we would never normally see with our own eyes. And I think that's always a lovely part of photography. So something as simple as a dandelion gives us actually lots of opportunities to play and explore with our cameras. So that's the part that I wanted to show you with that. So that's where you've got the dandelion essentially in situ, still stuck in the grass. But there's more you can do with that if you want to sort of take it out and then start creating a little setup. So what I've shown you so far then is the sort of dandelion, as you can see, and this notion that you can change your focus, and it almost allows you to kind of see through the dandelion and set your focus levels at different places. Where it also becomes fun is if you want to do like a little setup. So what I'm going to do now is flip over, so it's just to show you something I did here. So this is just, you know, a garden bench, you know, which obviously with a few seed heads. And what I did was I kind of playing around with seed heads and some picked dandelion flowers. Slightly different angle here. In this particular one, I've been spraying water over it as well to try and get little water droplets. You can see here I've got a dandelion clock head, which I'm, you know, taking bits off and putting down. There was a little bit of a breeze, which was also making everything a little bit unpredictable as well. But playing around this with my camera, this one was done with where the sun was coming from behind, and that notion of backlight again. If you can get backlight, it's always that little magical extra element. So if you can get if you've got a sunny day, if you can get the other side of the dandelions, and then when you've got the water is catching these little droplets, they're lighting up, and it becomes something quite magical. Here you can see with the actually how narrow the depth of field is. You know, we've only got this little area of about, you know, probably less than a centimetre before it starts going out of focus before and back. So we have managed to get this one in focus. This one's got bits in focus. This, by the time you get to that one, is going completely out of focus, but it's adding texture to it. Or we can play with things like this, where we've got a seed head right up against a dandelion flower as well. And again, water droplets become large. That sort of the dandelion itself, the yellow is echoing through it, but we've also got the light of the sky creating lots of texture and fun with that. Then we've got this one, which I showed you earlier. Done with this. So at this point, I've created almost a pool of water. I sprayed quite a lot of water onto the table, and so to try and get sort of little, you can see little reflections coming down here, and again with that backlight. And then, sorry, I've gone too far. Let's go back to here. And here, the wall of dandelions that I've created, the yellow flower dandelions, have then gone far enough back to be out of focus. I mean, they're only a couple of inches, but they're now out of focus, but they create a kind of beautiful yellow wall. And all these other seed heads are just sort of disappearing into the bouquet. And again, there's something quite magical, quite otherworldly. If you can play with light, little water droplets, backlight, and these wonderful kind of colours and these strands from the seed head, you could have a lot of fun with it. So that's brilliant if you have a macro lens. But what if you don't have a macro lens? This is where you can have a little bit of fun with magnifying glasses. Now, I've sort of shown some of you before now. It's like, let me just flick back here a moment. Even something like an ordinary magnifying glass. I mean, bear in mind, your phone is very similar to this little webcam here, perhaps slightly more sophisticated. But if you think this webcam here is just a lens, it works exactly the same way as the lens on your camera. So if you hold up a magnifying glass in front of it, you essentially get another lens where you can make things bigger, smaller. That allows you to zoom in. So this is just a fairly basic cheap magnifying glass. You can have more fun if you have something like this. It's like a kind of little jeweler's or insect thing. You know, sometimes you get these little magnifying glasses specifically for looking at insects and what have you. And this kind of thing you can then stick over the lens of your phone. So I'll just take my phone out of its case for the moment. So you have your phone, you've got the little camera bit at the back, and you can literally just stick that over the top of the camera, and that then gives you a really powerful macro lens. So if I push this into here, I don't know how you see, you can kind of too scary maybe, but it allows you to get in very close, very detailed, but again a very narrow depth of field. So it is essentially gives you that macro lens feel. So if I flip back over here, you can see that I've got that little magnifying glass, and then I've got so what I did then was I stuck my phone in front of the magnifying glass, and here you can see you've got this, you know, just straightforwardly, it's focused into the seed head past that sort of front layer of seeds. And immediately you've got, and this again completely unedited, but it gives you the starting point to show you that you can come in, and it just sort of again looks quite alien, otherworldly. But you've got something there that you could get in and edit and play with, or let's see. Oh, then I was sort of playing around with sort of the water spray. You see, you can get into droplets here. You can, so again, you don't necessarily have to have a macro lens. You know, if you don't have a macro lens, rather, don't let it stop you. Play around with magnifying glasses. There's all sorts of other things you can get. You can get extension tubes and adapters to reverse lenses and turn. But at the moment, some of these can be quite complicated or not, but at the moment what I'm just trying to say is just with what you happen to have in the house, or you can easily grab hold of, that won't cost you very much. Buy a kid's set of cheap magnifying glasses, and immediately you can start exploring the world, whether it's, something like this one is big enough to put in front of the lens of your camera. So, it does in fact actually essentially act as an extra lens. Something like this one is too small to go in front of your camera lens, but is absolutely ideal for your phone. So lots to play with, lots to experiment with, and I hope you find that interesting. I hope you find that useful. So I'd like to see, so go out and play. See what you can come up with. Post a couple of images into the group. Show off what you can do. It'd be really interesting to see if you come across, if you manage to create something where you go, ooh, this is fun, I want to show you. Put it into the group. Have a little feeling chuffed moment, and show us what you can create with a magnifying glass. Stacey says she likes the idea with the magnifying glasses. Jackie says she loves reading the blog. Always get the inside info. Vigi says, looks like a ballerina's gown, fluffed and standing on her toes. So I'm sure somebody else has talked about the idea of dancers or fairies, even the little things, the little seed heads. What else have we got here? My niece Charlotte says, evening Uncle Kim. I'm glad you could make it along, Charlotte. Vigi says, great idea, especially when we do not have a macro lens. Cool. Okay, well, I hope you found that useful. Lots of fun playing around in the garden, especially if you still happen to be in lockdown and can't get very far. Can't get out and about very far. So with that in mind, what we'll do now is move on to the critique section. Just to remind you, if you're finding these podcasts useful, entertaining, interesting, you feel like you get something out of them and you would like to support them, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is the best place to do it. But also don't forget to invite your friends along as well. Okay, Inga says, very useful, makes me want to run outside and try immediately. Well, that's good to know then. But hang on another hour or so until we get to the end of the podcast first. Might not be that long, not too short. Let's work our way now onto the critique section. So the critique section, a place where you can stick your images in, ask for feedback, ask for help, and get past the sticking points you have with your photography. Whether it's taking the photos, the concepts of the photos, the lining them up, cropping them, working out what lens you need, what settings you should have, how you might have improved an existing photo you've got, what you might do in the editing. All these things are possible. So it's pretty much anything photography. If you feel we all have sticking points. We all have bits where we get so far and then we're not sure quite what we need to do to improve the photo. We know it's not necessarily as good as it could have been, but we don't know where to go next. Just normally putting it up on Facebook amongst our friends will all tell us it's lovely, but they're not trained photographers and can't necessarily help us. So this is the corner of the internet to help you get past that. So tonight then, I've got about half a dozen, actually maybe 7 people have sent in different photos. So what we're going to do then is start working our way through the various ones. So I'll start off with Hege, who's new here from Norway. So now I've got no idea whether I'm pronouncing her name right. Hege. I asked her how you pronounce it in the writing, and she's pretty much said it's complicated Norwegian vowel sounds. I don't stand a chance. So I'll just go with Hege for the moment, and you can correct me later if you can think of a phonetic way of spelling. So she put up a picture of a dandelion head, I think inspired by the picture for the event page, and was then basically asking ways to improve this. Now, the thing is with it, this has already been edited. I will say that it makes it slightly easier if you can send me the unedited version as well. I should probably have said that. I think I forgot in the comments that I was saying, because then I can potentially show you other ways of editing. It's a nice photo. Again, you've got that kind of sort of zoomed in macro lens feel, got a nice bokeh in the background, nice rich texture. So you've obviously been playing with this a bit and really bringing out the sharpness of the little seed heads, and really in the centre as well. That's rather nice. I like that one sitting on the top there as well, almost like a kind of I suppose I'm thinking a bit like a dessert where they just put like a little mint leaf or something on top of the dessert. It's just like a little extra touch. So that's rather nice. What I would say here though is, in terms of composition, basically it's sitting very, very central, and by and large the centre part of an image tends to be almost the dead zone. It's like the least interesting part of an image. You might have heard of rule of thirds, but it doesn't have to necessarily be a full third of the way across. But that notion of off-center very often adds a little bit more energy into a picture. Now, I would also talk about the notion of diagonals, but you do have this on a diagonal. Diagonals tend to be really good. They kind of add an extra element of energy to them. But just very quickly, just to give you a sort of slight idea on this, that if I go to the crop and we'll do content aware, which allows, so I think part of the thing is it feels like it's sort of sitting very central but then a little bit low, and I think really balance wise, that's what I'm trying to do, yeah. If this was to be sort of slightly more up to one side, even angled a little bit more, something wrong. We've got to be careful we don't want to lose that little seed head at the top there. So yeah, maybe just, it doesn't have to be much, but I think just over a little bit. And then, now this is using content aware fill. Yeah, maybe that side, or I don't know, maybe it feels like it's moving a bit too far out the way there. Let's potentially try this then in the other direction and actually have a little bit more space over to the left. I think that maybe will work better. Let's just see how that turns out. Yeah, you see, I think there's something a little bit more interesting in that, because it's sort of leaning this way. It's more kind of leaning into the photo, and you want to have a little bit of space ahead of it, maybe cropped off a little bit too much up the top there. But if at that point then, again, a little bit, you've already played around with the editing quite a bit as is, but it might be interesting just to sort of see what a vignette, there's a little bit of, so if I go to the optics here and create a little bit of vignette, something like that. Or even actually you could lighten, do the opposite, do a kind of whiter vignette, I think, or darker. Right, so, well, okay, let's just go for the darker for the moment. Then what that does is it pulls the attention back to, so yeah, I think probably the darker, and then that way it draws the attention back to the dandelion head, but you feel like you've got more room to breathe over on the left hand side of the picture now. So I don't think that, it's a nicely taken photo. I like the detail in it, I like the processing you've done with it, but it's just really a case of, I think when you go back to your original version of this, I think it just sort of sits just a little bit too central, and it kind of feels like a little bit off to one side. I mean, yeah, make sure, I mean, obviously I didn't quite mean to crop off that top of the seed there. You want to keep that, but should give you an idea. So I hope you find that useful. I think really when it comes down to it, I think it's a really lovely photo, but there's always a slightly dodgy thing about putting something smack bang in the middle, unless you've got a really good reason to and you're balancing it in other ways. Generally speaking, slightly off center can work a bit more and allow that sort of sense of movement. You've got a nice diagonal in there which gives a sense of movement, but if you're having a movement, then you have to have a little bit of space for it to move into. So I hope that helps. Right, okay, let's just flick back. What else have we got here? So I've got a few more, no, didn't want to do that, right, a few more comments. Sandra says, really keen to have a go with some dandelions at my allotment if it stops raining. Yeah, you can run out between showers, but you will have some nice raindrops on some of the clocks though. Oh, Sandra says I'm freezing again. Hopefully that was only temporary. Hegger says, okay, next time I'll remember that. Okay, that's cool. VG says, we do not have dandelions here, but cotton seeds are a good alternative, I guess. Excellent. Yeah, I mean, wherever you are in the world, there are going to be, I mean, this is just using dandelions because this is something that's really common in our garden. But wherever you are, there will be similar plants that you can use. Hegger's not quite so keen on the vignetting, but other than that, she agrees. Okay, cool, and that's fine. All I'm doing is throwing forward suggestions. And I suppose it's worth saying for all these things with the critique is I'm putting forward my suggestions, which maybe make you think, oh, there's something I hadn't thought of. If you don't like it, that's okay, it's your choice. The way you develop your voice in photography is by the decisions you make. And if you have a preference for lighter this, red shifted that, this amount of detail or softness, what draws you to that is what eventually becomes your voice, the way you process. But sometimes even within that, we get stuck. So it sometimes helps if you've got somebody else that comes up with some other ideas to play with. But yeah, all I'm doing is suggesting, and if you prefer things another way, then that's absolutely fine. Right, okay, so what we want to move on to now is Vandana. So Vandana put in this image and says, I took this picture thinking of the word balance in mind. Balance of spices. Not sure if I've gone too far in the editing, making it too dark. Does it represent balance? I think, first of all, it probably is a bit too dark, Vandana. I think there's starting to lose some of the contrast in there. But it's a kind of a slightly tricky one. There's a couple of different things really I would mention with this. First of all, I think, yeah, great fun. You've got all these fantastic spices. I'm not even going to there are people out there who are much better at I mean, it looks like there's probably a bit of cinnamon bark in there. Some star anise? No, I'm not entirely sure. I'm not a great cook, however. So you've got the spices, and that's a good start. Now you put them on some kind of glass dish here, which has got these kind of little circular sort of aspects in the patterning in the glass. And I think they are kind of interfering a bit. They're sort of drawing the eye away from the spice. So a sort of a completely plain glass might have been better, or a plain dish of some kind. There's a slight problem with the focus. It doesn't feel completely in focus. It's quite. I'm not sure whether it is sort of slightly blurry in places, or whether it's just a kind of a little bit too low resolution. I'm not sure whether you took this on your phone or what camera you're using, whether it's a low resolution camera or whether it's just you didn't quite hold it steady enough, or you had a slower shutter speed for it. I don't know what your original settings were on it. But I think if you're going to do something like this, you really want to try and get one aspect of it as sharp as you can. And then the other thing really is the sense that I kind of feel like I'm slightly struggling to find where to rest my eye. Very often the best way of doing something like this is to have a key element, which is the bit that draws the eye immediately, and then the rest of them kind of become the supporting cast. Or you have two key elements which balance each other off. So it might be that you use a particular spice or a particular use of colour, and you place that, well, not completely centre, but off centre, and then arrange some of the, say like the cinnamon sticks or bark or whatever, to create leading lines towards it. There's a lot to play with the notion of composition. If you think in terms of composition as leading lines and how you want to draw the eye into a place and then draw it through the picture, I think that changes the way you approach the photography. At the moment, what you've done is you've kind of clustered it up and you've placed it there. It feels very kind of horizontal and vertical. There's the diagonals, there's little diagonals, but they're not very strong diagonals. And the horizontals and verticals tend to kind of, they calm a picture down, or they de-stress it a bit, but I think they de-energize as well. And I think when you've got something like spices, which are exciting, the notion of spices and food is to make the flavors exciting, and I think you really want to have more of a sense of excitement within it. And if you use that notion of diagonals into your picture, then that adds a level of energy which would sort of ramp it up a bit. So I think really with this is to go back and play. If you've got these, first of all, have a plate or a dish or whatever that you're putting on which isn't distracting from the spices, because these little sort of circular things within the picture, I think, on the dish, I think become a little bit distracting, because really what you just want your eyes to be focused in on the spices themselves, not the background. The background isn't enhancing the story of the spices. But if you sort of get in and play with them and then start arranging them and keep playing with the arrangement and move them and nudge them, take another photo, shift something and give it a bit more diagonal, move it again, and keep taking photos and moving, I think you'll start to find after a while something will go click. You'll go, oh, hang on a sec, I like that. Now, unless I had all these sitting in front of me, I can't tell you exactly how to arrange them. But what I do know is that the more you play with it, the more your eye and your brain starts to become attuned to it. And if you have, these are wonderful ingredients, and I think there's a huge potential for what you've got here. But I think the real thing is to start playing with that notion of composition. Start thinking about how you can draw the eye into the picture, bring in a few more diagonals, bring in leading lines. Take something so that you look at one part and it draws your eye up to another part of the picture. And I think if you do that, then there's a whole world you can explore of essentially still life spices. So I hope that gives you some ideas to play around with Bandana, but thanks for sending that picture in. Okay, where are we then? Right, Stacey's saying she's going to said she could always send Fiji some dandelions because she's got a whole load of them. Right, Fiji says the spices are cinnamon, mace, a byproduct of nutmeg and star anise, and some rice. Okay, so Fiji knows her spices. And John says, read the spice shot, maybe cut back on the amount of spices in the shot, but he does like the concept. Vijay says lesser spices might do the trick is what I feel. Bandana, lovely collection of spices, maybe on a darker wooden plate, perhaps filling out the colours of herbs more vividly. Lesser ingredients might also do the trick. Okay, so yeah, well, Vijay knows her spices too. So I think you're right. A wooden board would certainly be an interesting one for playing around, just creating a kind of plainer texture. That way, I suppose you also not have to worry about the reflections of the glass getting in the way and interfering. So lots of options. Yeah, it's really maybe start off with fewer ingredients and just sort of start off. Sometimes we can kind of overcomplicate and try and throw too many things in at the same time. So we've got too many things in the picture while we're also trying to work out lighting, we're also trying to work out composition, we're also trying to work out balance and all these kind of things. And really the advice at that point is strip it down. Start with one. If you just had a cinnamon stick, what would you do with it? If you had just had one star anise, or if you had a star anise and a cinnamon stick, what would you do with that? And then if you had a couple of grains of rice, what would you do with that? Add in bit by bit, but first of all, start off with maybe no more than 2 or 3 elements. Get your lighting right, get the angle of the camera as you want it, and then start building. Add something else, take another photo, see how much adding the extra is either adding to the photo or detracting from the photo. Use it as a learning experience. Keep adding bits. In some ways it's not dissimilar to cooking, I suppose. There's times when the rough idea of what you want, but then you take a taste and you go, oh, actually it needs a little bit more of this, or it needs a little bit more of that, or oh no, I accidentally put in too much of that. What else do I need to put in to counteract it? If you've got these ingredients and you've got the time to sit there with your phone, there's lots of potential to play and explore and learn by doing. So Thanks too for your suggestions, VG there. Right, okay, so let's move on then. And next up, we're going to talk to Stacey. So, Stacey sent, now to show you, this is Stacey's original photo, and then what she said was, this building is called Glencairn. It's a museum. At one time was a residence to the Pitcairns. There is some history behind this family and a lot of rumours, but they started a new church. Beautiful, regardless, this beautiful property is lined with beautiful trees and abundance of unusual plants and shrubs. So, great building. I can see why you wanted to photograph it. I love the old structure of all the buildings. The only question is, now, what happened was, when she edited the photo, she ended up with this. She says, the only question is, because of haze, there is a white halo in the colour after using one of my filters. The second photograph of this, I took the colour out. So then she sort of did a very desaturated. It's not completely black and white because you can still see there's some green in there. But we've still got the haze that's happening around the edge of the building. Now, really, although the original doesn't have this haze, the particular kind of filters you put on have created it. And the thing about this is it comes down to the filters you use and why sometimes got to be careful about it, because there will be that effect. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you essentially what happens when you're editing. So let's just drag this photo into Photoshop. Now, okay, let's just get rid of that little bit there. The other thing I would say is it does feel like the building is tilted. So what you want to do is you want to, not necessarily, it's not about lining up the horizon, it's really about lining up this vertical properly. Just get that tower just kind of feeling a little bit straighter. So we can do that. Right, now, what I was going to talk about here is, I'll just copy that. Now, let's say what we decided we want to do is we want to darken the sky. Now, there are filters, sometimes there's pre-filters set and what have you, and you sort of click something and it automatically darkens the sky. Now, if I sort of loosely select the sky, like this, just get that. Now, what we're doing is, say, in the case of your picture was darkening the sky. So if I then grab a curves and I just pull the curves down, so we get a darker, deeper, bluer sky. And essentially, perhaps it's something like that you're going for, and it feels, all right, that's a kind of nicer sky. However, the immediate problem you have is on the edges. You can see where it doesn't really like the edges. There's bits where it's missing, there's bits where it's overlapping. You're ending up with these sort of nasty little dark lines where it joins up. It's not always clean. It's fine on something like the edge of the building there, but it's maybe not looking so great on the edge of the roof here, and certainly around the trees edges. It's kind of a bit nasty. Now, basically, what's happened here then is the people who sort of design these filters to sort of darken your sky for you, what they do is they create a softer edge. So if we go back to here and let's just reselect the sky, but instead of having a complete right up to the very edge of the selection, I'm going to soften it. So what I do is I go to select, modify, feather, and feathering takes away the hard edge and creates a soft edge, and I can change the thickness of this feathering. At the moment, because this is quite a large photo, I'll have 100 pixels. And what it does now is if I go and grab the curves here and then darken it, you'll notice as it darkens, it's soft around the edges of everything else. And this is almost identical then to the effect that's happened on your thing. What it means is we don't end up with those nasty edge lines right where it meets, things like the trees and what have you that we were getting in the other version of this. But the problem is that it's also created this halo effect because it's softened and the sky was so much brighter underneath compared to what it was. You're still seeing the lighter bit around the edge. So in essence, that's the explanation of what's going on. And the only way around that is to use a different filter or play with the editing in a different way, or to really be prepared to go in and push pixels around the screen. Another option is if you've got something like this, no, not that one, let's take that off, where you're not so keen on the edges, is to sort of soften out the sky so you only get the darker bit at the top. So if I say take that down to, I don't know, 37% or something, and then just kind of gradate the sky a little bit, something like that, so that you've kind of got your original colour down the bottom. That's maybe too strong there. And then bring some of that back in. And it's just kind of darker on the top. And as long as you've got a gradient between them, you can still kind of make it so it feels a little bit more natural. And then that way you're not getting the hard edge on the actual trees and what have you. So that's one way of playing around with it, Stacey. But I hope that kind of gives you a better idea. And basically what it comes down to is if you're using preset filters, then some of them work extraordinarily well and do exactly what you want, and some of them don't. And if it's not doing what you want, don't use it. Find another one or find another way around it. So I hope that kind of explains the effect of why you sort of ended up with that halo effect. Right, okay, let me close that, and flip back to the comments. Okay, VG says, beautiful building, Stacey, nice capture. Excuse me. Right. Okay, so what we're going to do now is Hegger says grading was a good tip. Thank you. And Stacey says, I understand, next time I will soften it. Cool. Good. Okay, so what we're going to do now is move on to VG. Now, VG's been playing around with placing objects on a mirror. So she says, I've seen some photos where the objects were placed on a mirror and photos were taken. And questions on the mirror was reflecting and didn't look like a clear polished surface. She's been playing around. So she put some of these pictures into the Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres Facebook group, but she also sent me unedited versions as well. And then said the background of the unedited one, the background was kind of a dull black, dark grey tinge. The shelves looked dull without any kind of lustre on them. I edited them in Lightroom as my Photoshop was throwing in some errors. I did a basic edit darkening the background, not sure if it looks natural or unnatural or overcooked. Can you give me some guide regarding to the editing of the images and to make them look a bit more natural? She's given me some of the settings, but okay, what I'm going to do here is just pull up one of the, so here's unedited image. So what VG's done is she's got two shelves, she's placed them on a piece of glass. You can see the edge of the glass in the background there, and she's got a piece of black cloth behind the glass so that the reflection is also black behind it, so that just the shelves are standing out. So this is the starting point. Now, if we open that into Photoshop, and so first, what she did already, and we'll just repeat this, is we'll crop in and just create maybe slightly off center. Not entirely sure whereabouts you want that, but let's say something like that. So this is the picture we're playing with. But yes, it's kind of dull. Now, there's immediately one thing that I wanted to mention, VG, or whilst you said you put in some of the settings. With this one, you've got an 800 ISO and something like 15th of a second. And I worry slightly, although you say you're using a flash, I think there might be ambient light getting in as well. you've got to make sure that, I mean, really with this, if you've got this set, say at an f8, you're shooting indoors and you've got a 100 ISO, then if you've got it at something like 50th of a second, if you took it without the flash, it would be completely black. And that's what you, and then, but then when the flash goes off, only the flash is lighting it. And that's what you're wanting to get to, is where only the flash is lighting it, not the overhead light. And if you are doing what we talked about last week, which is turning the flash and bouncing the light, then you would end up with some really interesting shadows. This doesn't look like it's got any interesting shadow effect, which makes me feel that chances are too much ambient light is coming in. But it's something we can chat about another time if you want. With regards to the shot on the mirror, I think if we go to the level, if I just take the levels, what we can see over here is it is very dark. If I grab this and pull this up, just pull this up to the edge here, that immediately makes everything come up to the bright. So we're allowing, you want to, in this little levels panel down on the right here, you want to just grab that bit on the right and bring it up to at least where the histogram starts. And then now if you go too far, it whites out. But if you just bring it up to there, it's immediately made it brighter, a little bit more interesting. Now, the next problem we have with a mirror, and there is what we can, you might be able to see, I'll zoom in here, is there's a kind of a secondary reflection going on. Now, I don't know how well, I'll tell you what, I will brighten, let's grab some curves and pull that up a bit so that, don't worry about the picture, I just want to make sure that those of you watching this can see this sort of funny echo around the edge of the shells. And essentially what's happening there is it's about the mirror that's being used, because the mirror is glass, and whilst most of the reflection is coming off the front part of the glass, you've got the thickness of the glass, and the back of the glass creates a kind of another layer of reflection, and that then interferes, and you end up with this secondary reflection bit going on here. Now, this is something known to all people who ever try to photograph anything on a mirror, whether it's fresh raspberries or strawberries or dribbling chocolate or shells or anything you do on a mirror. You've got this problem of a secondary reflection coming in. Ways around that, a lot of people will then actually invest in something like a piece of, rather than using glass, they will use highly polished metal. So something like a really highly polished aluminium. You always also have a problem with any kind of really smooth sheen surface, especially reflective surface. If you get dust on it, it also tends to really show up as well. Now, ways you can do this, if you want, you can go in and literally play around with your clone tool and sort of copy a bit of that and sort of start painting over the top. And, you know, I mean, it's a lot of mucking about and will take you time. Another thing to do is to play with the curves or the levels themselves. If we go back to this levels thing here, if I drag this down to take this one over on the left and drag it to the right. Now, if I take it down too far, we lose everything, but we can nudge it. If I get down to about there, now what's happened is the background has become black rather than grey, and we've lost most of that echo that was just on the outside of the shells. There's still a bit of the stuff that appears on the inside of the shells, and to be honest, there's not a lot I can do about that unless you really want to go in and literally play around with your clone tool and paint them out. What I would also say with this one, VG, is I know that is a reflection of a hole that is actually in the shell, but I find it's drawing the attention and distracting. I don't know that it's necessarily contributing to the story of it, and I think I would be very tempted to just clone that out. So it's kind of look a little bit like an eye. I don't know. If you like that, and actually that's part of your story, and you're going, no, Kim, I put it there deliberately for it, then that's okay. Forgive me. This is my taste. But I think now we've got that, so without having to do anything more than play with the levels, really, we've managed to brighten. Let's just pull up this levels thing here. We've managed to bring that up and make it brighter, and we've managed to pull that down and make the blacks blacker. And immediately then I think the whole thing works that much better. So that's where I would say to get in and play. Play with your levels first, or play with curves. Curves is another one to muck around with. You can also see whether you need to do any colour shifts. I mean, let's copy that, put it into Camera Raw for the moment. I just want to show you what happens at the moment, depending again on the lighting in the room, whether this has got a yellow shift on it or something else. You see, you can change the temperature of it, the colour temperature. And if I just nudge it slightly into the blues, see, it makes it much cooler. If I go over to the right, it makes it much warmer. And of course, you get silly levels, but you can play around a little bit. There's the blue-yellow slider. There's also the purple-green slider as well. But just because you don't necessarily have to use the one that came straight out of the camera, that's really what I'm saying. If maybe we just sort of nudge this over to the left a little bit, slightly cooler, slightly interesting, but it slightly kind of plays up that kind of pearlescence element of this part, I think. Soft and subtle, but again, if you prefer it slightly warmer, that's okay. So I hope that helps, Vijay. I hope that gives you some ideas on that. So thanks for sending that in. But I think mirrors are fun things to sort of sit things on and play with. Okay. What have we got here? Becca says, great reflection idea. Stacey likes the shell. April's turned up and says, hello everyone. Hi April, glad you could make it. Vijay says, posted the setup in the group. And April prefers it with black background. Vijay says the hole made it kind of look a bit like a fish's eye, but she feels it looks better when it's filled. Ben says look for first surface mirror, for mirrors with a reflecting surface on the top of the glass, not behind it. I've just seen one for £10 for a 10 centimetre square on eBay. The reflecting surface is unprotected, so you'd have to be really careful with it. Oh, there's an interesting one. Well, thanks for looking that one up, Ben. So, for those who aren't watching this on the recording, if you're watching this on Facebook and you're in the Facebook, Ben's got the comment in there, but he says, look for first surface mirror. And that gives you a mirror where it's reflecting on the top of the glass and not through the bottom of the glass. However, you then don't have the glass protecting the reflecting surface, so presumably if you scratch it or you do anything wrong, then that's it, kind of ruined. Okay, Hegger says, I tend to skip manually adjusting levels when I edit, but I will now try to play more with the levels. Thanks for showing tips on level adjustments. Oh, I'm glad that's useful. And VG says, we'll check that out, Ben. Thank you, sounds interesting. Yeah, thanks for that input, Ben. That's really good. Okay, great. Cool. Lots of great ideas and stuff coming out here. So next up, we're going to talk about Cliff. Now, Cliff, submissions for critique, 2 techniques I am trying to refine. The first is panoramas, and the second is automatically looking for diagonals when initially composing an image. So I made during a visit to a local aviation museum in Norwich, I made a conscious effort to try and shoot out of my comfort zone. I was quite pleased with the panorama. It was originally composed 180 degrees. It's a very big picture with 11 images all stuck together, but then he cropped them down so only about 6 of the images were included. In hindsight, I think the weird dimensions of the Nimrod aircraft would have benefited from being closer with a wide angle lens and adding some distortion. So let's just show you the picture that he's actually talking about. So this one started off as a bigger picture where he took 11 images, stitched them all together, and then actually kind of came back cropped in. So this represents the equivalent of about 6 images stitched together. However, it has kind of created this sort of slightly sort of strange, it doesn't quite look right on that, I must admit. But he goes on to say, in hindsight, I think the weird dimensions of the Nimrod carrier, which is this one with the 55 on the front, would have benefited from being closer with a wider angle lens to add some distortion. What are your thoughts? Now, I think this is one of those things where have a wide angle lens, get in close, lie on the ground underneath it. I think there's lots of different angles you could play with. I think one of the biggest problems with this one though, Cliff, actually is is the way the horizontal is working. The dominant horizontal line is, of course, the wings of the aircraft. But because these are more or less at head height or eye height or camera height, you see, this is the problem is, by the look of this, you've taken this photo standing up at your normal eye level. And what that's done is this wing also happens to be roughly where the horizon is, and it's where these planes are behind, and where the hangar is, and it just becomes kind of cluttered. We've got big patch of grass in front, and then a whole mass of clutter on this bit of horizon, and then the sky. Now, I like the way you brought out the texture in the sky. That's really interesting. I think the editing style is interesting. I like the texture you've got in it, but I think the problem is this sort of cluttered middle line. And really, if you had just squatted down, as you say, maybe moved a little bit closer, then you might have got some of the interesting other pictures, other planes like these ones over on the right, would have appeared under the wing. If you'd been low enough, that it would have kind of created, and then the wing itself might have had the sky as the background. You wouldn't have had quite so much sky in there, that which might have worked better, and you'd have had something else happening under the wing. Or the other alternative is you stand on top of a ladder and you kind of shoot down a bit, in which case these planes over here would also be in picture and not hidden by the wing of the Nimrod. So really, I think it's as much one of that kind of composition. There is also this feeling that it sort of falls off to the right. The horizon seems to bend around, and I think this is one of those slight problems you can have when you sort of do a panoramic stitch and you put them all together, that sometimes the horizon itself seems to sort of curve around, and you kind of need to make adjustments then to sort of straighten the horizon back up again, which you haven't really done over on the left. So it does feel like it's sort of tilting and sort of falling off slightly to the right of the picture, to the left of the picture there, I think. But other than that, I think the main thing here is the kind of clutteredness, and I think, yeah, going in lower or going in higher would have made a better difference. Having a wide angle lens, getting in close, I think you could have had a lot of fun with that as well. So, hope that helps, Cliff. I will also just say, I'll point you on to the other photo, which Cliff then sent was this one, where he said, the propeller image, I deliberately tried to avoid having any horizontal or vertical lines to avoid stabilising the image as per advice in an earlier episodes to add drama to a static item. So, brilliant, and nice to know that you remembered something I said. I'm busy here chatting away, giving out bits of information. I've got no idea whether anybody ever actually remembers anything that I say or not. But no, I like this. I really like this, Cliffy. That notion that there isn't a parallel line in there anyway. Every line is shooting off at a different. There is no vertical, there is no horizontal, and none of the lines are actually parallel. And so it really does add a credible sense of movement to it, even though, as you say, it is a static image. So, yeah, extra smug points for that one, Cliffy, I think. I like the fact that I like the way you've done that. Great. Okay. So, thanks for sending that in, and I hope the thing about the wings on the Nimrod kind of gives you some ideas of how to play with that. Right. Where are we? Oh, Becca says she likes the propeller one is my favourite. Yeah, it's a really nice, strong image, that. Okay, so next up then, on to Becca. And so Becca's been getting her trusty model, daughter, out with the dandelions and the dandelion clocks. And she took this one and this one. And what she says is, I took these last Wednesday, got through a lot of dandelions once she grasped the idea of blowing them. This was more off the cuff with my trusty little model. Hoping I'm getting to grips with composition and getting the technicalities spot on. Well, what I would say immediately for me, Becca, is of the two, I prefer this one, I have to say, over this one. I mean, they're both fun photos, wee lass blowing the... I like the fact that you can see the cheeks puffed up and you can see the little seeds flying off into the air. I would say with this one, it feels the crop ratio. It doesn't quite feel right to me. There's a lot of space up the top there, which I feel is missing, which is kind of almost irrelevant. There's a large patch of green here, which is grabbing the attention as well. Maybe I'm tempted to go a little bit more cinematic with this. So let's just throw this into Photoshop and play with the crop a minute. Let's close VG's picture there. And quite simply, I think if we pull this down a bit and then we pull this up a bit, we don't need the whole arm, but maybe just get the edge of the cuff in, something like that. Oh, maybe there. And yes, I think that immediately sort of does it a little bit more for me. And so now with this sort of slightly more cinematic crop, in fact, you could even take out the top of her hair. We know the hair is there. Yeah. Could perhaps even widen it, make it even more cinematic if you want it. But then what we've got, the point being here is that we've now got this line, she's blowing, and we've got these the seeds of the dandelion flying off to the right. And I think just that composition feels, because the action is all happening within this strip of it. It's all about her blowing, that lovely little hand holding the dandelion, and then the seeds flying off. That's where all the action is happening. That's where the narrative is in this. Whereas if you go back to your original crop, the top part there isn't adding anything, the bottom part isn't adding anything, and if anything, because especially because she's got a bright white thing as well and dark patch, your eye is kind of getting torn in different directions. But quite simply, I think cropping in a bit makes a difference. Maybe in the editing you would want to sort of darken down this the shirt, the jumper underneath the coat, I think is probably a bit too loud. Something as simple as, let's say what I do is I'll just do a colour selection of that pink. I don't want it too strong, but what I'm going to do is onto a separate layer, or even just okay, on a separate layer, let's get the brush. That's gone way too big. Need to bring down the brush. There we go. Too big for me to see it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to paint. I'll show you here what I'm going to do. A rough little paint over there like that. Now that in itself is too strong and you don't want it. But what we're going to do is we're going to change the blend mode. See, darken, multiply, color burn, linear burn, lighten, screen, overlay, soft light. And I think really what we want is, if we go to multiply, but then we'll take the opacity of this down a little bit. We just sort of nudge that up to something as simple as sort of about quarter strength. Now the multiply allows the darker bit of the little button there to still come through and not be blocked out. And all we've done is just sort of taken the edge off. We've given a sort of slight pink thing to tie in with the coat, so you're not really noticing, but it stops the white grabbing us and dominating. So that's all I would say with that one. I think, it's a fun photo, just a slightly more cinematic crop. And with the other one that you had, the only other thing that I noted, I think this post on the left kind of grabs the attention somewhat. So again, I would just be tempted to remove that. Something as simple as using the spot healing tool. I just grab that and drag that down there. See that that takes that out. So things like that. Again here, because the jumper is lost in shadow, you've not got that bright white part of the jumper grabbing the attention. What I quite like about this as well is the fact that the focus, the sharp point, is in fact on the dandelion, and and her face is slightly out of focus. But you can also see that lovely intense concentration on her face as well. But it does draw your eye to the dandelion head, and then of course to the little seeds flying off as well. So hope that gives you some thoughts and ideas to play around with, Becca. So lovely photos. It's lovely seeing a kid having fun with dandelions. My grandson Alfie came round to a little garden visit the other day, socially distanced, but he was having fun picking a few of these and blowing the seed heads off. Right, okay, so do a quick flip back. What other questions have we got? Comments have we got? VG loved. Back on the photographs of the planes. VG loved the propeller picture. Jackie also loved the propeller image. Stacey says they've also got Air Force museums in Pennsylvania as well for old warplanes. VG says dandelions are a distraction. She loves the young girl. Becca says, yeah, I don't know why I was a bit tunnel visioned on that front. Instantly better. Another thing to think of, actually, just there, Becca, while I think about it, is sideways on. Those are interesting where you're looking head on and she's blowing the things. But actually, you've also got the sun behind. You've got the sun behind you. The sun's kind of that second image was slightly more interesting. It's light coming from the side. What I would suggest here, if you're going to play around with this, is backlight. Remember how much I talk about the notion of how interesting. Well, we were just talking about at the beginning backlight with dandelions. If you had your daughter side on, blowing the dandelions out, but you had the sun behind her, the light behind her, so you're getting that lovely kind of glow, edge glow around her, and you would get the backlight of the seed heads flying. And if you've got a fairly narrow depth of focus as well, so you've got that nice kind of bokeh effect in the background. I think there's a lot of potential in that as well. So think, and again, kind of sort of cinematic style layout. Think the length of the picture, her blowing, well, you're getting that direction going through the picture and you've got the light coming from behind. I'd say definitely explore that and see how you get on. Okay, cool. Where are we? Right. Inga says, useful way to tone down the white. John says, great pics of the wee girl. And Becca says, thank you for the feedback and direction as always. Excuse me. Right. Okay, so what we're going to do now then is move on to Nuria. So now Nuria sent this one in actually last week, but it sort of ended up, it only got here about an hour or something before the podcast started, so I said it was just a little bit too late to start in. So what she did was she sent in the picture of a snail and says, hi Kim, it's been raining like nobody's business the last few days, so what else to do than take photos of snails? So I got a few close up and wanted to play around with depth of field. Not sure I did a good job here, but I tried. I always try, no harm in trying. I must admit, I do like the detail on the shell, how it blends in with the concrete itself, but not sure about the cropping, how to make it better or a bit more interesting. What could I have done better? Took this in my back garden, thank you. Here's the before and after shot. So this is the before, and then she sort of cropped in a little bit closer and played with the contrast a little in the editing. Now, I think here, I mean, yeah, first of all, yeah, you've got a snail, great, going. And what's really, I mean, it's been in the wars, this one as well. I mean, that I can only imagine that patting on the shell really means that essentially at some point it's been grabbed by a bird, dropped from a height or tried to be smashed against the concrete ground or a stone at some point while the bird's tried to get to the snail inside, and it hasn't worked and it's given up. So, evolutionary wise, it's worked for this snail. That shell has protected it. Even if it's come off a bit worse for wear, it is still here. Now, I think it's a kind of a tricky one, this, because I think, Nuria, that there's the problem is, I think, is the snail is too similar to the background. You've got the snail itself is quite textured. The shell is quite textured. The background is quite textured. So this concrete path is very busy, really, at that, when you get down to these small levels. And then the other problem is that the colour isn't really different. The snail kind of is a grey, a slightly darker grey than the concrete, but there's not, and although the shell is brown, it's still browny greys, and the ground is browny greys. And I kind of feel that what's missing here is contrast, is one of the first things. I think if you'd lifted the snail and put it on grass, or even if you put it on, say, an old flower pot, a terracotta, nice orangey terracotta plant, place it on that, then I think you would have had some nice colour contrast. You would have a contrast and textural contrast as well, so that the contrast so if you've got the smoothness of a flower pot, then the texture of the shell and the snail itself will stand out that much better, and the colour of the flower pot, or like I say, grass or something like that, you're going to get that lovely kind of contrast, and with those contrasts then the snail's going to stand out much more. The other thing I would say, apart from texture and colour, is the angle. Now, I think, to go back to this notion what we were talking about before, with diagonals kind of add a little bit more energy and interest, I think, quite often to a picture. I think this is just a little bit too horizontal. What would be quite interesting, I think, is if you came in at if you sort of moved around 45 degrees and got a shot of the length of the snail as it's coming towards you, but it's sort of almost disappearing into the distance. So you've got a sort of sense of perspective running down the length of the snail. I think so you've got like a diagonal or a lead, or a kind of, whether it curves in or it's straight in, but a little bit of perspective, I think, could have made it really quite interesting. I don't know how close you can get in, whether you have a macro lens, or even you go and grab yourself a magnifying glass. Can you get in much closer to the shell? There's a lovely spiral within it. How close can you get in with that as well? So I think really, you found the snail. You can pick it up by the shell. That's fine. Place it on a plant pot. Maybe a broken plant pot, or one that's at an angle. Place it on some grass or some thick leaves. Change the angle you're shooting at. This is where I think that the picture is really going to come to life. I mean, fine, you've got this picture, and if you're going to edit it, you've cropped it in, you've played a little bit with the contrast. That's fine for the edit. But I think you would end up with a better picture if you started from a different angle and you placed it into a different background, and then play with it. We've got digital cameras. It's not costing us anymore to take 40 photos and it is to take 2 photos. It's not like we've got to take them and go and get them developed, and it costs us money for every reel of film. We're past those days. So experiment and play with different colours, different backgrounds, different surfaces, and really importantly, different angles, I think. And I think you'll probably find that there's a whole world of snail photography to open up before you. So I hope you find some of those suggestions useful, Nuria. Okay, a couple of questions coming in. Becca said, or comments rather. Becca says the snail looks like it's got a plaster patch on its shell. VG says the snail is camouflaging itself with the background. So yeah, that sense that it's just kind of, it's not really standing out enough. Becca says a macro shot would do your vision justice. Nuria says I need to get a magnifying glass. Absolutely. And VG says, what a creation. The snail with its own mobile home. The wanderlust is obvious, but at its own pace. Lovely. Love that. Okay, so that's pretty much us in terms of critique for tonight. All right, Nuria says, that's great, Kim. I shall try that next time. Thank you. Excellent. So next week, quick reminder before we get to that, if you found these useful, interesting, entertaining, would like to support the podcast, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres, and or invite your friends along. Next week then is Spring Fling Special. So Spring Fling is an event of where traditionally, at the last weekend of every May in this corner of Scotland, Spring Fling is an event whereby you have anything from about 60 to 100 artists open up their studios and people come round and visit the studios. And had it not been for COVID, I would have been opening up my studio this weekend. Or rather, I don't really have much of a studio, but I have some friends who've got a larger space, and I've done this before. And I set up a camera, do demonstrations, have pictures on the wall. And what happens is, for the weekend, for a long weekend, people can come round, visit, meet, chat, and ask me questions. And across the course of the weekend, I get asked all sorts of questions. Everything from what kind of camera I like using, what my favourite lens is, through to technical, some of the critique things like, oh, well, look, here's a photo I took on my camera, what could I have done better, through to even people wanting to know what my favourite pizza is. So what I was going to do, whilst now Spring Fling is happening online, and if you go to spring-fling.co.uk, from this Saturday, you will find there's about 60 odd studios who are doing an online version of Spring Fling. I have a page there as well, and Maggie has a page. Maggie's got a video where she's talking through some of her processes. There's quite a lot of people giving talks and ideas, so it's a fantastic thing to go and see. Now, my kind of Spring Fling special, tying in with the podcast, is essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it an Ask the Photographer time. This is your opportunity. If you want to ask me questions, if there's things you want to know about me, my photography, my approach to photography, the equipment I use, really what I want you to do is think about, if you had the chance to come and visit me at my studio on an open studio weekend, what would you ask me? So I will create a little event page, just like I usually do for the podcast, and you can stick your questions into the event page, or you can put them into the Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres Facebook group, or you can email me them as well, or direct message me via Facebook. If you're watching this on YouTube, again, you can probably just message me, go to my website, find my email address, and email me the questions. What would you like to know? And then next week, what I'll do is answer the questions. Tune in. Maybe there'll be some live ones that you can ask me as well. If you see what happens. Depending on what I get asked, I might have a stack of images sort of sitting to one side ready to pull in for examples. At the moment, I haven't a clue. I don't know what anybody's going to ask me. Maybe I'll just be sitting there, I'll get asked 2 questions and that'll be it and it'll be over. But I am hoping that I will, as well as the regular crew, I'm expecting a few more people coming in for the first time via the Spring Fling event. So this is your chance. What would you like to ask me? If you were turning up to see me in an open studio event, what questions would you have? So have a think about that, and as from tomorrow, I'll have the event page up and you can start sticking your questions in. Now, there will obviously have to be some kind of time limit on this. If I end up with 400 questions, we'd be here all night. So think carefully about the questions, and depending on how many I get, if I get a lot, I might kind of chunk them together a little bit, but have a thought. Right, so that's pretty much us. Where are we now? So Stacey says, thanks for your insights. Jackie says, that sounds like a great idea. VG says, looking forward to it. Right, that's us. Thank you to everyone who sent in images. Thank you to everybody who turned up and waved and said hello and left comments. And thank you even to the people who lurked and watched but didn't actually say anything. Hope you enjoyed the episode, and next week, Spring Fling special. I hope you can make it and invite your friends along. Okay, look forward to seeing you next Tuesday. Take care then. Bye-bye. Right, now it's just a case of finding the end screen. Cheerio.